Patricia Lawson had exactly 4 minutes left on her lunch break when the most ridiculously handsome man she'd ever seen collapsed face first into her Caesar salad. One moment, she was enjoying a peaceful meal in the hospital cafeteria, mentally complaining about the croutons being stale. The next moment, 6 feet of unconscious Korean muscle was bleeding into her lettuce. His bodyguards rushed forward, shouting in Korean, reaching for him. But Patricia was already moving, fingers on his pulse, checking his airways, her medical training kicking in faster than her common sense. "Everyone back up," she commanded, "and somebody tell me why this man has a 2-inch gash on his ribs that looks 3 days infected." The largest bodyguard stared at her, with barely concealed panic. He refused treatment. Refused treatment? Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I don't know who this man is, but in about 6 hours, his refusal is going to get him a nice, cozy coffin. Is that what you want?" The bodyguard swallowed hard. "What do you need?" Patricia looked down at the unconscious stranger, his perfectly sculpted jaw now smeared with Caesar dressing. "First, a napkin. Your boss is wearing my lunch." Welcome back to our channel, beautiful people. If you're new here, you're in for a treat. And if you're returning, we love you for coming back. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what you think is going to happen next. Trust us, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Now, let's dive in. The hospital cafeteria erupted into chaos. Nurses scrambled, doctors shouted orders, and security tried to figure out why 4 massive Korean men in designer suits were suddenly crowding the salad bar. Patricia ignored all of it. She'd been an ER nurse at St. Matthew's Medical Center in Los Angeles for 3 years. She'd seen gunshot wounds, car accident victims, and once, a man who'd accidentally stapled his hand to his own face. A bleeding stranger in her salad wasn't even her weirdest Tuesday. "Get me a gurney," she shouted, pressing her napkin against the wound on his side. "And someone call Dr. Patterson. Tell him we've got a possible sepsis case incoming." 2 orderlies appeared with a stretcher, and Patricia helped them lift the unconscious man onto it. As they moved, his eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Dark eyes, intense, even half-conscious, he looked at her like he was memorizing her face. Then his eyes rolled back, and he was out again. "Sir?" Patricia snapped her fingers in front of his face. "Sir, can you hear me? What's your name?" Nothing. The largest bodyguard, a man built like a refrigerator, with a face that suggested he'd seen things that would make grown men weep, stepped forward. "His name is Gerald Kyung. He's a businessman." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "A businessman who walks around with untreated stab wounds?" The bodyguard's expression didn't change. "A very dedicated businessman." "Uh-huh." Patricia wasn't buying it, but she also didn't have time to argue. "Well, your dedicated businessman is about to meet a very dedicated surgeon. Follow us to the ER, and try not to intimidate any of the other patients." The bodyguard nodded, falling into step behind the gurney with his 3 colleagues. They moved in perfect formation, like they'd practiced this exact scenario before. "Who the hell is this guy?" Patricia wondered as they rushed through the hospital corridors. She glanced down at his face. Even pale and unconscious, he was startlingly handsome. Sharp features, a strong jaw, dark hair that fell across his forehead in a stylishly tousled way. Rich, handsome, and stupid enough to ignore a potentially fatal infection, she thought. Perfect combination. They burst through the ER doors, and Dr. Patterson was already waiting, snapping on gloves. "What do we have?" "Male, late 20s, infected wound on the right side of his torso," Patricia reported. "Looks like it's been festering for at least 3 days. Possible early-stage sepsis." Dr. Patterson peeled back the blood-soaked napkin and winced. 3 days? Why didn't he come in sooner? "Apparently he refused treatment," Patricia said dryly. "Well, that was idiotic." Dr. Patterson shook his head. "All right, let's get him into surgery. Patricia, I want you on standby. We're going to need to monitor him closely once we clean this up." "Got it." As they wheeled Gerald Kyung into the operating room, Patricia felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. She turned to find the refrigerator-sized bodyguard looming over her. "Miss," he said, his voice low and serious. "Mr. Kyung is a very important man. We need to know that he's in good hands." Patricia met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, I've kept people alive through situations you couldn't imagine. Your boss is in the best hands this hospital has. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. Behind her, she could have sworn she heard one of the other bodyguards mutter something in Korean. She didn't need to understand the language to recognize the tone. Respect. Gerald Kyung woke up 3 hours later with a splitting headache and a very strong opinion about hospitals. He hated them. The sterile smell, the fluorescent lights, the constant beeping of machines, all of it made him want to rip out his IV and walk straight out the door. Which he tried to do. "Mr. Kyung, if you take one more step, I will personally sedate you and strap you to this bed." Gerald froze, one foot already on the cold hospital floor. Standing in the doorway was the most unimpressed woman he'd ever seen. She was maybe 5'6", with dark skin and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, neat, low bun, and she wore light blue scrubs that somehow made her look both professional and completely unbothered by his existence. "Who are you?" Gerald demanded. "Patricia Lawson, your nurse." She crossed her arms. "And the woman whose lunch you ruined." Gerald blinked. "What?" "You collapsed into my salad, Mr. Kyung. Face first. I'm still finding croutons in my stethoscope." Despite himself, Gerald felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "I apologize for your salad." "You should apologize for your decision-making," Patricia shot back, walking toward him with the confidence of someone who was absolutely not afraid of him. 3 days. You walked around with an infected wound for 3 days. Do you have any idea how close you were to dying? Gerald's jaw tightened. "I've had worse." "Congratulations. Would you like a medal, or would you prefer to just act like a reasonable adult?" Patricia pointed at the bed. "Sit." Gerald stared at her. No one talked to him like this. No one. He was Gerald Kyung, the head of one of the most powerful organizations on the West Coast. Men twice his age showed him respect. His enemies feared him, his allies treated him with careful deference, and this nurse was ordering him around like he was a misbehaving child. "I don't take orders," he said coolly. Patricia's expression didn't change. "Mr. Kyung, you have 18 stitches in your side, enough antibiotics in your system to knock out a horse, and a blood pressure that tells me you haven't slept properly in weeks. You are not in a position to give orders. You are in a position to sit down, shut up, and let me do my job." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Gerald sat back down on the bed. Patricia nodded in satisfaction. "Good. Now let me check your vitals." She moved with practiced efficiency, checking the monitors, adjusting his IV, and examining the bandage on his side. Her movements were brisk but gentle, her touch professional. Gerald found himself watching her more closely than he intended. "You're not afraid of me," he observed. "Should I be? Most people are." Patricia glanced up at him, one eyebrow raised. "Mr. Kyung, I've dealt with patients who tried to bite me, patients who threw bedpans at my head, and one memorable gentleman who was convinced I was a government spy sent to steal his kidneys. You're intimidating, sure, but you're also my patient. And patients don't scare me." Gerald felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Amusement. He couldn't remember the last time someone had genuinely amused him. "You're strange," he said. Patricia snorted. "Says the man who collapsed into a Caesar salad, pot, meat kettle." Before Gerald could respond, the door opened, and the refrigerator-sized bodyguard, whose name was actually Dae-soo, stepped inside. "Boss," Dae-soo said, relief evident in his voice. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" "Fine," Gerald said automatically. "He's lying," Patricia interjected, without looking up from her clipboard. "He feels like garbage, but his male ego won't let him admit it." Dae-soo's eyes widened. Gerald shot her a look. Patricia smiled sweetly. Am I wrong? Gerald's jaw tightened. No. That's what I thought. She finished her notes and tucked the clipboard under her arm. You'll need to stay overnight for observation. Doctor's orders. I'll be back to check on you in a few hours. Try not to do anything stupid in the meantime. She walked out without waiting for a response. Dae-soo stared after her, then slowly turned to look at his boss. Gerald was watching the doorway with an expression Dae-soo had never seen before. Boss, Dae-soo said carefully. Who was that? Gerald leaned back against his pillows, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Apparently, he said, my nurse. Gerald Kyung was not used to being told what to do. He was especially not used to being told what to do by a woman who seemed completely immune to his money, his power, and his admittedly devastating good looks. Yet here he was, 24 hours later, still in his hospital bed, because Patricia Lawson had threatened to accidentally lose his discharge paperwork if he tried to leave early. You're enjoying this, he accused, as she checked his vitals for the 5th time that day. I have no idea what you're talking about, Patricia said, her voice dripping with false innocence. I'm simply doing my job. You're keeping me prisoner. I'm keeping you alive. There's a difference. She made a note on her clipboard. Your blood pressure is better. Still too high, but better. Have you actually been sleeping? I don't sleep well in hospitals. Join the club. Neither do I, and I practically live here. Patricia moved to check his bandage, her fingers gentle as she peeled back the gauze. The infection is clearing up nicely. A few more days of antibiotics, and you should be back to your regularly scheduled mysterious businessman activities. Gerald studied her face as she worked. You're very good at this. I know. And very modest. Modesty is overrated. I'm good at my job and I know it. Why pretend otherwise? She replaced the bandage and stepped back. There, you're healing well. Try not to do anything ridiculous for at least 2 weeks. Gerald caught her wrist before she could move away. Patricia looked down at his hand, then up at his face, her expression unreadable. What are you doing? She asked calmly. I have a proposition for you. Mr. Kyung, I'm flattered, but I don't date patients. It's not that kind of proposition. Gerald released her wrist. I need a private nurse, someone to monitor my recovery once I leave this hospital. Patricia's eyebrows rose. You have bodyguards. Get one of them to check your bandages. They're not trained medical professionals. You are. Gerald met her gaze steadily. I'll pay you 3 times your current salary. You'll have your own quarters, full access to my home's facilities, and no responsibilities beyond ensuring I don't die from my own stubbornness. Patricia stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not a polite, restrained laugh, a full, genuine laugh that made her whole face light up. You're serious, she said, still chuckling. You actually want to hire me as your personal nurse. I'm always serious. Mr. Kyung, I have a job. A career. I'm not going to just drop everything because some rich guy collapsed into my salad and decided he liked my bedside manner. Gerald tilted his head. Is it the money? I can go higher. It's not the money. Patricia crossed her arms. It's the principle. I don't even know you. For all I know, you could be a serial killer or a... I'm not a serial killer. That's exactly what a serial killer would say. Gerald felt his lips twitch. Fair point. But I assure you, my business is entirely legitimate. Legitimate businessmen don't walk around with stab wounds. It was an unfortunate accident. An accident. Patricia's tone made it clear she didn't believe him for a second. Right. Gerald leaned forward, ignoring the pull of his stitches. Miss Lawson, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't trust easily. I don't let people into my home, and I certainly don't let them see me vulnerable. But you've seen me at my worst, and you didn't flinch. You treated me like a regular patient, not like someone to be feared or impressed. That's rare. Patricia's expression softened slightly. So you want to hire me because I yelled at you? I want to hire you because you're competent, unflappable, and apparently incapable of being intimidated. Those are valuable qualities. Patricia was quiet for a moment, studying him with those sharp, perceptive eyes. 1 month, she finally said. I'll take a leave of absence. Not quit, just a leave, and work for you for 1 month. After that, I go back to my regular job, and you find someone else to keep you from dying. Gerald smiled, a real smile, not the controlled expression he usually wore. Done. And I want it in writing, a contract, with very clear boundaries. Of course. And I'm not calling you sir, or boss, or whatever your bodyguards call you. You're Gerald, and I'm Patricia. We're adults. Gerald's smile widened. Agreed. Patricia nodded, looking like she couldn't quite believe what she'd just agreed to. Fine. When do we start? As soon as I'm discharged. Gerald settled back against his pillows, looking more satisfied than he had in weeks. Welcome to the Kyung household, Patricia. Patricia shook her head, already wondering what she'd gotten herself into. This is going to be a disaster, she muttered. Gerald just smiled. The Kyung estate was, without exaggeration, the most ridiculous thing Patricia had ever seen. It sat on a sprawling property in Beverly Hills, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, and guarded by more security cameras than the White House. The main house was a stunning blend of modern architecture and traditional Korean design, all clean lines and natural materials, with massive windows that offered views of the Los Angeles skyline. You live here? Patricia asked as the car pulled through the gated entrance. Alone? Gerald glanced at her from the passenger seat. I have staff. Right, of course you do. She looked out the window at what appeared to be an actual koi pond. Is that a waterfall? Yes, naturally. Dae-soo, who was driving, caught her eye in the rearview mirror and smiled slightly. You'll get used to it, he said. I sincerely doubt that, Patricia muttered. They pulled up to the main entrance, where a small army of staff members was waiting to greet them. Housekeepers, groundskeepers, a chef in an actual chef's hat. Patricia half expected someone to roll out a red carpet. This is excessive, she informed Gerald as he carefully exited the car, one hand pressed against his healing side. This is Tuesday, he replied. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes stepped forward. Mr. Kyung, welcome home. We've prepared everything as you requested. Thank you, Mrs. Park. Gerald nodded toward Patricia. This is Patricia Lawson. She'll be staying with us for the next month as my private nurse. Please see that she has everything she needs. Mrs. Park's eyes swept over Patricia with obvious curiosity, but her smile was warm. Of course. Welcome, Miss Lawson. I'll show you to your quarters. Thank you. Patricia grabbed her bag from the trunk and followed Mrs. Park inside. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Polished floors, tasteful artwork, furniture that looked both incredibly expensive and surprisingly comfortable. Everything was immaculate without being sterile. Clearly, someone had put real thought into making this place feel like a home. Your room is in the East Wing, Mrs. Park explained as they walked. Mr. Kyung's quarters are in the West Wing, but there's a connecting hallway for emergencies. You'll have your own bathroom, a sitting area, and access to the library and gardens. That's very generous, Patricia said, trying not to gape at the crystal chandelier hanging above them. Mr. Kyung wanted you to be comfortable. Mrs. Park stopped in front of a carved wooden door. If you need anything at all, just press the intercom button. Someone will assist you immediately. Thank you, Mrs. Park. The older woman smiled again, but this time there was something knowing in her expression. I have to say, Miss Lawson, you're not what I expected. Oh, what did you expect? Someone more impressed. Mrs. Park's eyes twinkled. It's refreshing. Mr. Kyung could use someone who isn't afraid to speak honestly to him. Before Patricia could respond, Mrs. Park had turned and walked away. Patricia stood alone in the hallway, staring after her. What have I gotten myself into? She murmured. Then she opened the door to her room and promptly forgot the question. The room was actually a suite, a beautiful, spacious suite, with a king-sized bed, a private bathroom with a soaking tub, a small sitting area with a couch and television, and a balcony overlooking the gardens. Patricia dropped her bag on the floor and walked slowly through the space, running her hand over the soft bedding, peeking into the bathroom, marble counters, heated floors, more fluffy towels than any one person could possibly need. "Okay," she said to the empty room. "Maybe this won't be so bad." It was bad. Not the accommodations. Those were heavenly. Not the staff. Everyone was unfailingly polite and helpful. Not even Gerald himself, who was surprisingly pleasant company when he wasn't being an obstinate mule about his recovery. The problem was that Gerald Kyung was, without question, the worst patient Patricia had ever had. "You need to rest," she said for the 14th time that day, standing in the doorway of his home office. Gerald didn't look up from his laptop. "I am resting. I'm sitting down. You're working. That's not resting. I'm checking emails. It's very relaxing." Patricia walked over to his desk and closed his laptop with a decisive snap. Gerald looked up at her, dark eyes sharp. "I was using that. And now you're not." Patricia pointed toward the door. "Bed, now. It's 2 in the afternoon. And you had surgery 4 days ago. Your body needs time to heal, Gerald." "That means sleep, not spreadsheets." "I've slept. 3 hours last night doesn't count." Gerald's jaw tightened. "How do you know how long I slept?" "Because I'm good at my job." Patricia crossed her arms. "You have dark circles under your eyes. You've been rubbing your temples like you have a headache. And you've refilled your coffee cup 6 times since breakfast. I'm not an idiot." For a moment, Gerald just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was genuine. A low, warm sound that transformed his entire face. Suddenly, he didn't look like an intimidating businessman. He looked young, almost boyish. "You're relentless," he said. "I'm right," Patricia corrected. "There's a difference." Gerald shook his head, still smiling. "Fine, I'll rest, but I want dinner in my room tonight, and I want to choose the movie." "Movie? If I'm going to be banished to bed like a child, I might as well be entertained." He stood, wincing slightly as his stitches pulled. "Join me. You can make sure I don't secretly start working again." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Is that an order?" "It's an invitation." She considered refusing. It wasn't professional, sharing meals and movies with a patient. It blurred lines that should probably stay firmly in place. But Gerald was looking at her with something almost like hope in his eyes, and Patricia realized, with sudden clarity, that this man was lonely. He had staff, bodyguards, probably hundreds of business associates and contacts. But actual companionship? Someone who wasn't afraid of him, who treated him like a normal person? That, apparently, was in short supply. "Fine," she heard herself say, "but I'm choosing the snacks." Gerald's smile widened. "Deal." That evening, Patricia found herself sitting on a frankly ridiculously comfortable couch in Gerald's private sitting room, eating popcorn and watching him argue with the television remote. "It's not that complicated," she said, reaching over to take it from him. "You just press this button. I know how to use a remote." Evidence suggests otherwise. Gerald shot her a look that probably terrified boardrooms full of executives. Patricia was completely unmoved. "You're very rude," he informed her. "I'm very honest. There's a difference." She navigated to the streaming app and held up the remote. "All right, what are we watching?" "You choose." Patricia scrolled through the options. Action, romance, horror, surprise me. She selected a Korean romantic comedy that she'd been meaning to watch for months. Gerald raised an eyebrow when the opening credits appeared. "Romance? You said surprise you." Patricia settled back into the couch, grabbing a handful of popcorn. "Besides, I've heard this one is good." They watched in comfortable silence for a while. Patricia found herself genuinely enjoying the movie. The leads had great chemistry, and the writing was sharper than she'd expected. She also found herself occasionally glancing at Gerald. He was actually watching, his expression more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. The harsh lines of his face had softened, and once or twice she caught him smiling at a particularly funny scene. "You're staring," he said without looking at her. Patricia felt her face warm. "I'm not staring. I'm observing." "Observing what?" You're actually enjoying this. Gerald did look at her then, one eyebrow raised. Is that surprising? A little. You don't exactly seem like the romantic comedy type. What type do I seem like? Patricia considered. I don't know. Serious documentaries about economics? Maybe historical dramas about war and politics? Gerald's lips twitched. I do enjoy those. But I also enjoy stories about people falling in love. Is that so strange? I guess not. Patricia turned back to the screen. You just seem very guarded. Romance requires vulnerability. Maybe that's why I enjoy watching it. Gerald's voice was softer now. It's easier to experience vulnerability through fiction than in real life. Patricia didn't respond, but she felt something shift in her chest. He was more complicated than she'd first thought, more human, and that was dangerous. 2 weeks into her stay, Patricia had settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings were for checking Gerald's vitals, changing his bandages, and making sure he actually ate breakfast. Afternoons were for rest, enforced by Patricia's unrelenting insistence, and light physical therapy. Evenings were for dinner together, usually in his sitting room, often accompanied by movies or surprisingly engaging conversations. Patricia learned that Gerald spoke 4 languages fluently and was learning a 5th. She learned that his favorite food was his grandmother's kimchi jjigae, though he hadn't had it in years. She learned that he read voraciously, everything from philosophy to trashy thrillers, and that he had a dry, subtle sense of humor that often caught her off guard. She also learned that he was very, very good at deflecting questions about his personal life. "Why are you so secretive?" she asked one evening as they sat on his balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Gerald sipped his tea. Patricia had banned him from coffee after 3 p.m. "I'm not secretive. I'm private. There's a difference." That sounds like something a secretive person would say. Perhaps. He smiled slightly. "What would you like to know?" "Everything." Patricia pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "But I'll start with the obvious. What exactly do you do?" "And don't say business. That's not an answer." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "My family has interests in several industries. Import, export, real estate, technology. I oversee all of it." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He stared out at the fading light. "But it's also necessary. My father built this company from nothing. Walking away isn't an option." "Where is your father now?" "Gone." The word was flat, final. "He died 3 years ago. Heart attack." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He was a hard man. Brilliant, but hard. Gerald's jaw tightened. "He taught me everything I know about business. He just never taught me much about anything else." Patricia watched his profile, the tension in his shoulders, the distance in his eyes. "What about your mother?" she asked gently. "She lives in Seoul. We speak occasionally, but she prefers her distance." Gerald's smile was thin, humorless. "As you can imagine, family dinners are not our strong suit." Before Patricia could respond, there was a knock at the door. "Enter," Gerald called. Dae-soo stepped inside, looking unusually tense. "Boss, you have visitors." "They're insistent." Gerald's expression immediately sharpened, all vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cool control. "Who?" "The Lee brothers." Patricia watched Gerald's face carefully. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance? Wariness? "Show them to the main sitting room," Gerald said, rising to his feet. "I'll be down shortly." Dae-soo nodded and left. Gerald turned to Patricia, his expression unreadable. "I apologize, but I have business to attend to. We'll have to continue our conversation another time." "Is everything okay?" Patricia stood as well. "You seem tense." "The Lee brothers are associates of mine. We have a complicated relationship." He paused at the door. "Stay in your room tonight. Don't come out until I send for you." Patricia frowned. "Gerald." "Please, Patricia." There was an urgency in his voice she hadn't heard before. "I need you to trust me on this." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but something in his expression stopped her. "Fine," she said reluctantly, "but if you're not back by midnight, I'm coming to find you." Gerald's lips curved slightly. I wouldn't expect anything less. Patricia tried to stay in her room. She really did. She lasted about 45 minutes. The curiosity was killing her. Who were these Lee brothers? Why did Gerald seem so unsettled by their arrival? And why had he asked her to stay hidden? She told herself she was just going to get some water from the kitchen. That was all. A completely innocent trip for hydration. She absolutely was not going to eavesdrop on Gerald's meeting, except the main sitting room was right next to the kitchen, and the door wasn't fully closed, and Patricia had exceptional hearing. Think you can just ignore our calls for 2 weeks? A man's voice, sharp with irritation. You owe us answers, Kyung. I owe you nothing. Gerald's voice was cool, controlled. Our business was concluded months ago. Our business is never concluded. Not when you're sitting on information that could be useful to us. If you're referring to the shipping manifests, I've already told you, they're confidential. I won't compromise my legitimate operations for your schemes. A second voice spoke, softer but somehow more menacing. Such loyalty to the rules. Your father would have been more flexible. My father is dead, and I'm not him. Gerald's tone hardened. If you came here to intimidate me, you've wasted your time. I don't respond well to threats. We're not threatening you, Gerald. We're reminding you of what we know, of what we could share with certain interested parties. Silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then Gerald spoke, and Patricia barely recognized his voice. It was cold, hard, utterly devoid of warmth. If you think you can blackmail me, you're gravely mistaken. I have resources you can't imagine, connections that go higher than you could ever reach. Test me, and you will regret it for the rest of your very short lives. More silence. Then footsteps, moving toward the door. Patricia scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall of the hallway, heart pounding. The sitting room door swung open, and 2 men stepped out. They were both tall and well-dressed, with the hard-edged look of men who were used to getting what they wanted. They walked right past her without a second glance. When they were gone, Patricia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You can come out now. She jumped, spinning to find Gerald standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. I wasn't, she started. You were eavesdropping. I was getting water. The kitchen is in the other direction. Patricia closed her eyes, caught. Okay, fine. I was eavesdropping. But only because you were being mysterious and telling me to stay in my room, and I'm physically incapable of not investigating when people tell me not to investigate. Gerald stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he laughed. You're impossible, he said, shaking his head. Absolutely impossible. I prefer persistent. Patricia folded her arms. Are you going to tell me what that was about? No. Gerald. It's not your concern, Patricia. His voice was firm, but not unkind. I appreciate your curiosity, but some parts of my life need to stay separate. For your protection. For my protection? Patricia stepped closer, eyes narrowing. What does that mean? Are you in some kind of trouble? Not the kind you're imagining. Gerald reached out, and for a moment, Patricia thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he simply adjusted the collar of her cardigan, his fingers barely grazing her neck. I have enemies, rivals who would use any weakness against me. I don't want you caught in the crossfire. I'm not weak. I know. His eyes met hers, dark and intense. That's not the point. They stood there, close enough that Patricia could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, and feel the warmth radiating from his body. The air between them felt charged, electric. You should go to bed, Gerald said softly. It's late. So should you. Patricia's voice came out huskier than she intended. I will. Soon. Neither of them moved. Finally, Patricia took a step back, breaking the spell. Fine, but we're talking about this tomorrow. I expected nothing less. She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. The next morning, Patricia woke to find a small orange box sitting outside her door. She brought it inside and opened it carefully, revealing a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny crescent moon. There was a note underneath, an apology for last night. G. Patricia stared at the bracelet for a long time. It was beautiful, elegant, obviously expensive, and completely inappropriate. She stormed down the hall to Gerald's study, not bothering to knock before she threw open the door. He looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. "Good morning to you too." "What is this?" Patricia held up the bracelet. "And don't say a bracelet, because I have eyes. It's an apology gift." "I don't want an apology gift. I want an explanation." She dropped into the chair across from him. "What's going on, Gerald? Who were those men? What are you involved in?" Gerald leaned back, studying her. "You're persistent." "We've established that." Patricia met his gaze without flinching. "You said you have enemies. You said you were protecting me. From what? Why would anyone want to hurt me?" "Because of me." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Because being close to me makes you a target, and I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of my world." Patricia felt her heart stutter. "Your world? Gerald, you keep talking in riddles. I can't help you if I don't understand." "Who said I wanted your help? You hired me to keep you healthy. How am I supposed to do that if I don't know what's actually going on?" Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "My father didn't just build a business," he said finally. "He built a network, connections, alliances, agreements, some of them legal, some of them less so. When he died, I inherited all of it, the legitimate companies and the shadowy ones." Patricia listened, not daring to breathe. "The Lee brothers were partners of my father's. They want access to certain assets that I've been refusing to give them. They're convinced I'm hiding something valuable, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Why not just give it to them?" Gerald turned to face her, his expression hard. "Because what they want would hurt innocent people. I won't be responsible for that." Patricia stood slowly. "So you're trying to protect people, even though it puts you in danger. Someone has to." She walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. "Gerald, that's noble. Stupid, but noble." His lips quirked. "High praise from you." "I'm serious." Patricia reached out and touched his arm, feeling the muscle tense under her fingers. "You can't carry this alone. You need people you can trust." "I trust Daesu, Mrs. Park, a few others." "What about me?" Gerald's eyes searched her face. "You're different." "Different how?" "Dangerous," he said softly. "You make me want things I can't have. Make me feel things I've spent years learning to ignore." Patricia's breath caught. "Gerald, I hired you because I needed a nurse, but that's not why I've kept you here." His voice dropped. "You know that, don't you?" She should step back. Should remind him that she was his employee, that this was inappropriate, that she barely knew him. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. "I know," she whispered. Gerald reached up and cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably. You should leave. Go back to your hospital, your normal life." "I should. But..." His dark eyes bore into hers. Patricia smiled slowly. "But I've never been very good at doing what I should." She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce, demanding, a release of all the tension that had been building between them for weeks. Gerald responded immediately, pulling her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressed against the small of her back. They kissed until they were both breathless, until Patricia's lungs burned and her head spun. When they finally broke apart, Gerald rested his forehead against hers. "This is definitely a terrible idea," he murmured. "Definitely," Patricia agreed. "We should probably stop." "Absolutely." Neither of them moved. Gerald opened his mouth to say something, probably something annoyingly romantic, when the lights went out. Every single light in the mansion. Dead. Patricia blinked in the sudden darkness. "Please tell me you forgot to pay your electricity bill." Gerald's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The softness vanished. His body went rigid, his jaw locked, and his eyes became two dark stones. "That's not the electricity," he said quietly. Before Patricia could respond, Dae-soo burst through the study door, breathing hard. "Boss, the Lee brothers. They've breached the east perimeter. They've got about 12 men. They've cut the power and jammed communications." Gerald's voice was ice. "How did they get past the outer gates?" "Inside help. We're still figuring out who." Patricia looked between them. "Wait, breached? As in, broke in? Into this house? Right now?" Neither man answered her, which was answer enough. "Gerald," she said firmly, "what's happening?" He turned to her, and in the darkness, his expression was unreadable. "The Lee brothers have decided negotiations are over. They're here. Those two creepy guys from last week are here." "Patricia, I need you to stay in this room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Dae-soo." "Gerald, please." He gripped her shoulders. "I can handle this, but I can't handle it if I'm worried about you." Before she could argue, he was gone, Dae-soo flanking him, the study door closing behind them with a heavy click. Patricia stood alone in the dark study for about 11 seconds. "Lock the door and stay put," she muttered, pacing. "Sure. That's a great plan. Just sit here in the dark like a damsel in distress, while God knows what is happening out there." She paced some more. "I'm a trauma nurse. I've handled code blues, cardiac arrests, and a man who swallowed 14 magnets on a dare. I don't hide in rooms." She grabbed a heavy brass bookend from Gerald's desk. It was shaped like a lion, and it had a satisfying weight to it, and cracked open the study door. The hallway was dark, but not silent. She could hear movement downstairs. Footsteps, raised voices, the sound of furniture being shoved. Patricia crept down the hallway, brass lion clutched in her right hand, heart hammering, but her mind sharp and clear. She reached the top of the main staircase and looked down. The main sitting room was chaos. Gerald stood in the center of the room, flanked by Dae-soo and two other bodyguards. Across from him stood the Lee brothers, the same two men she'd seen before, along with about 8 of their men who were spread around the room. The older Lee brother was talking, his voice carrying up the staircase. "Done playing nice, Gerald. You have something we want, and you're going to give it to us. Tonight." "I've already told you my answer," Gerald said, his voice controlled but sharp. "The shipping manifests stay with me. I won't let you use my company to move anything that harms people." The younger Lee brother smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "We thought you might say that, which is why we came prepared with alternative motivation." He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a phone and held up the screen. "Security footage from your own cameras, Gerald, before we cut them." The younger Lee brother's smile widened. "Lovely woman you've been spending time with. The nurse? Patricia, isn't it?" Gerald's entire body went still, the kind of still that comes before an explosion. "If you touch her, we won't have to. Not if you cooperate." The older brother stepped forward. "Sign over access to the manifests, all of them, and your pretty nurse stays perfectly safe." Patricia watched from the top of the stairs, fury building in her chest like a furnace. Did this man just threaten me? Did this overdressed, overgrown bully just use me as leverage? Gerald's shoulders dropped slightly. Just a fraction, but Patricia saw it. He was going to give in. He was going to surrender everything he'd been fighting for, his principles, his integrity, the protection of innocent people, because of her. Oh, absolutely not. Patricia assessed the situation from the stairs. The Lee brothers' men were focused on Gerald and his bodyguards. No one was looking up. The younger Lee brother was standing directly below the staircase, slightly separated from his group, gloating like a man who'd already won. And on the wall beside the staircase hung a large, heavy-framed piece of artwork. Some kind of abstract piece in a thick, gilded frame. It looked like it weighed a solid 20 pounds. Patricia looked at the artwork, looked at the younger Lee brother's head, looked at the artwork again. This is either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever done. She set down the brass lion, reached up, and lifted the artwork off the wall. It was heavier than she expected, her arms strained, and she had to bite her lip to keep from grunting. She positioned herself at the top of the stairs, directly above the younger Lee brother. Lord, please let my aim be as good as my bedside manner. She dropped it. The heavy frame came down like divine judgment, catching the younger Lee brother squarely on the head and shoulders. He crumpled like a folding chair, hitting the marble floor with a spectacular thud. Everyone in the room froze. Complete, stunned silence. Then Patricia's voice rang out from the top of the stairs, sharp and clear. That's for threatening me, you low-budget James Bond villain. Gerald's head snapped up, eyes wide. Patricia? Hi, honey. Sorry about the artwork. I think I broke the frame. The moment of shock was all Gerald's team needed. Dae-soo moved first, tackling the nearest man. Gerald's other bodyguards surged forward. The Lee brothers' men, leaderless and caught off guard by a painting falling from the heavens, scrambled in confusion. The older Lee brother stared at his unconscious sibling on the floor, then looked up at Patricia with absolute bewilderment. "Who are you?" he sputtered. "A nurse with very good aim," Patricia replied, already heading down the stairs. She picked up the brass lion bookend she'd left on the steps. "And I have a backup. Want to test me?" The older Lee brother did not, in fact, want to test her. Within minutes, Gerald's security team, bolstered by the backup team that Dae-soo had apparently called before the power was cut, had the Lee brothers' men restrained. The police arrived shortly after, and Patricia watched with deep satisfaction as both Lee brothers were escorted out in handcuffs. The younger one was still woozy, blinking in confusion. Did a painting hit me?" he mumbled, as officers guided him out. "Modern art," Patricia called after him. "It's impactful." Gerald appeared beside her, slightly disheveled but unharmed. He stared at her with an expression that was equal parts disbelief, admiration, and exasperation. "I told you to stay in the room, and I told you I don't take orders. You dropped a painting on a man's head. It was a very ugly painting. I did your decor a favor." Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't even know what to say to you right now. How about thank you, Patricia, for saving my company and my integrity with your quick thinking and excellent hand-eye coordination." Gerald stared at her for another long moment. Then he started laughing. Deep, helpless laughter that shook his entire body, the kind she'd never heard from him before. "You," he said between breaths, "are the most terrifying woman I have ever met. And don't you forget it." The chaos took hours to sort out. Police reports, statements, security assessments. Mrs. Park made tea for everyone, including the police officers, because Mrs. Park was a saint. It was nearly 3 a.m. before the house was quiet again. Patricia found Gerald in his study, the same study where they'd kissed just hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. He was sitting on the couch, sleeves rolled up, a cut on his forearm from where he'd knocked against a table during the scuffle. "Let me see that," Patricia said, settling beside him with the first aid kit she'd grabbed from the bathroom. "It's nothing. I'll decide what's nothing. I'm the nurse, remember?" Gerald surrendered his arm without further protest, watching as she cleaned the cut and applied a bandage with practiced hands. "You could have been hurt tonight," he said quietly, "if that painting had missed. But it didn't. But it could have." And then he stopped, jaw tightening. Patricia set down the antiseptic and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man, this complicated, guarded, stubborn, brilliant man, was afraid, not of the Lee brothers, not of business rivals or threats. He was afraid of losing her. "Gerald." She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I'm right here. I'm fine. You're fine. And those two clowns are spending the night in a holding cell, probably still confused about how a piece of wall art ended their entire criminal operation." Gerald's lips twitched. It was an original. "Then I'm sorry for destroying priceless art." "Don't be. I never liked that painting." They both smiled, and the tension in the room eased. Patricia's hands were still on his face. His hands came up to cover hers. "I meant what I said earlier," Gerald murmured, "before the lights went out, before everything went sideways." "Which part?" "The part where I told you that you make me feel things I've spent years learning to ignore." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I wasn't just talking about attraction, Patricia. I'm talking about something much deeper than that. Patricia felt her heart hammering. Gerald, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. But Patricia did have something to say. She'd been holding it back for weeks, telling herself it was too soon, too complicated, too risky. After tonight, she was done holding back. I love you, she said simply. I love your stubbornness, your terrible sleep habits, your inability to use a TV remote, and your ridiculously expensive taste in ugly artwork. I love that you're trying to be a good man in a world that keeps pushing you to be a bad one. And I love that you collapsed into my salad, because it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Gerald's eyes glistened. For a moment, the great Gerald Kyung, feared businessman, head of an empire, looked like he might actually cry. That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me, he whispered. Well, don't get used to it. I have a reputation for being difficult to maintain. He kissed her then, soft and tender, nothing like the fierce kiss from earlier. This one was a promise, a beginning. When they pulled apart, Patricia nestled into his side, careful of his bandaged arm. So, she said, what happens now? Now? Gerald pressed his lips to her temple. We figure it out. Together. Together, Patricia repeated. I like the sound of that. The next 3 months were the happiest of Patricia's life. Gerald's world was still complicated. There were legal proceedings related to the Lee brothers, corporate restructuring, and the ongoing process of cleaning up his father's shadowy legacy. But for the first time, he wasn't doing it alone. Patricia returned to work at St. Matthew's, but she spent her evenings and weekends at the mansion. Mrs. Park had essentially adopted her, teaching her Korean recipes and sharing embarrassing stories about Gerald's childhood. Everything was good, better than good. Until the Wednesday that changed everything. Patricia was walking out of St. Matthew's after her first shift back in weeks, still in her scrubs, car keys in hand, thinking about what to order for dinner. Excuse me? Patricia turned. A young black woman stood a few feet away. She was pretty, with long, dark, bouncy hair that framed a face that was naturally beautiful, without a trace of heavy makeup. She dressed modestly, simple jeans and a soft pink blouse. Nothing flashy. She didn't look like she was trying to impress anyone. But her eyes were sharp, alert, and fixed directly on Patricia. Can I help you? Patricia asked. The woman smiled. It was a strange smile, warm on the surface, but with something underneath that Patricia couldn't quite read. You're Patricia Lawson, right? Patricia's guard went up immediately. Who's asking? Someone who's been where you are. The woman took a step closer, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like pity. You're with Gerald Kyung. It wasn't a question. Patricia's spine straightened. How do you know that? Because I know Gerald. The woman's smile faded. Better than you do. And I think you need to be careful. Careful of what? Of him. The woman's voice was quiet, steady, and completely sincere. His MO is finding black girls, innocent ones, smart ones, women who don't know what he really is. He finds them, he makes them feel special, makes them feel like they're the only person in the world. And then, she trailed off, shaking her head. And then what? Patricia demanded, her heart suddenly pounding. Who are you? What are you talking about? The woman looked at her for a long moment, something flickering in her dark eyes. Sadness? Regret? Just be careful, Patricia. That's all I came to say. She turned and walked toward the parking lot, her long, bouncy hair swaying with each step. Wait, Patricia called, moving after her. Wait, you can't just say something like that and walk away. Who are you? How do you know Gerald? The woman didn't answer. She climbed into a dark sedan, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. Patricia stood in the hospital parking lot, keys gripped in her hand, watching the car disappear around the corner. The afternoon sun was bright. Birds were singing. Somewhere inside the hospital, a phone was ringing. Everything around her was perfectly normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. The woman's words rang in her head. His MO is finding black girls, Innocent ones. Women who don't know what he really is. Patricia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with numb fingers. A text from Gerald. How was your first day back? I missed you. Come home soon. G. Patricia stared at the message. Come home. She looked at the road where the woman's car had vanished. Then she looked back at the message. And for the first time since she'd met Gerald Kyung, Patricia Lawson didn't know what to believe. And that's where we're leaving it today. Who is this mysterious woman? What does she know about Gerald? Is she telling the truth? Or is something else going on entirely? Drop your theories in the comments below. We want to hear everything you think is about to happen. If you want part 2, you know what to do. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss it the second it drops. Share this video with someone who loves a good cliffhanger, because trust us, they're going to need to see this. Thank you so much for watching. We love each and every one of you, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.